He thought the greatest day of his life was the day she left. He saw her a year later, a ghost from his past, dressed in what he called pathetic simple clothes. He laughed standing beside his glamorous fiancée, a woman draped in a one-of-a-kind designer gown that screamed wealth and success. But what he didn't know, what the whole world was about to find out, was that the woman he was mocking, his insignificant ex-wife Evelyn, hadn't just admired that dress. She had sketched it, stitched it, and created it. This is the story of how a man's cruel mockery became the spotlight for his own public humiliation. The air in the Corinthian ballroom was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual fundraiser for the Children's Foundation, a night where New York's elite gathered to outbid, outdress, and outshine one another under the guise of philanthropy. Arthur Penhaligon navigated the glittering crowd with the practiced ease of a man who believed he was born to be in such rooms. On his arm, a perfect accessory to his tailored Tom Ford suit, was Bethany Cole, his fiancée. Her laughter was like the chime of tiny expensive bells, and her presence turned heads, mostly because of the dress. The dress was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light of the chandeliers. It fell in a column, simple in its silhouette, but breathtakingly complex in its construction. A cascade of hand-stitched, gunmetal grey beadwork traced the line of her collarbone and wrapped around one shoulder, resembling a delicate frozen branch of a winter tree. It was elegant, exclusive, and whispered a price tag that would make most people gasp. Arthur was preening. Every admiring glance at Bethany was a victory for him. It was validation. He had traded up. He had won. And then he saw her. Across the room, near a less populated bar, stood Evelyn Reed, his ex-wife. It took him a moment to be sure. She looked different, smaller somehow. She was dressed in a simple charcoal grey sheath dress made of a soft matty fabric. It had long sleeves, a modest neckline, and fell just below her knees. Her hair was pulled back into a neat low ponytail, and her face was almost bare of makeup. Beside the shimmering peacocking crowd, she looked like a sparrow in a flock of birds of paradise. A nasty, triumphant smile curled Arthur's lip. "Well, well," he murmured to Bethany, his voice a low thrum of condescension. "Look what the cat dragged in." Bethany followed his gaze, her perfectly sculpted brows furrowing slightly. "Who is that Evelyn?" "My ex-Arthur," said the word ex, laced with a satisfaction that was almost palpable. "Can you believe it? I haven't seen her since the divorce. Looks like life hasn't been too kind." He decided to approach her. It was a power move, a public demonstration of his new improved life. Bethany, sensing the drama, clung to his arm, a silent co-conspirator. Evelyn was speaking to the bartender when Arthur's shadow fell over her. "Evelyn," he said, his voice offensively smooth. She turned, and her eyes, a calm, clear grey, met his. There was a flicker of surprise, but it was quickly masked by a polite, neutral expression. "Arthur," she acknowledged, her voice even. She glanced at the woman on his arm. "I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Bethany Cole," Arthur announced, practically puffing out his chest. "Bethany, this is Evelyn Reed." "A pleasure," Bethany said, her eyes doing a swift, dismissive scan of Evelyn's simple attire. The judgment was clear. "You too?" Evelyn replied, her gaze briefly falling on the midnight blue dress. A strange, unreadable emotion passed through her eyes before she met Bethany's gaze again. "That's a stunning gown." Bethany brightened instantly. "Oh, thank you. It's a custom piece from a new designer Aura. Have you heard of them?" "Probably not. They're incredibly exclusive. It took my father's connections just to get a consultation." Arthur chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "I don't think Aura is on Evelyn's radar, darling. She always did favor minimalism." He gestured vaguely at her charcoal dress. "Still keeping it simple, I see. Very practical." The insult was designed to sting, to remind her of every time he had criticized her for not being flashy enough, for preferring quality and comfort over loud brand names. During their marriage, he had constantly tried to mold her into a society wife, buying her clothes. She hated pushing her into circles where she felt like an imposter. Her refusal, her quiet insistence on being herself, had been a major point of contention. Evelyn's composure didn't crack. She simply offered a small, tight smile. Practicality has its merits, Arthur. It lasts. So do investments. Arthur shot back pointedly, adjusting the cufflink that peeked from his sleeve. And I've always believed in investing in the best. Bethany looks like a queen, don't you think? She looks beautiful. Evelyn agreed, her voice still unnervingly calm. The lack of a wounded reaction was starting to irritate Arthur. He wanted to see a flash of envy, a hint of regret. He saw nothing. It was like talking to a placid lake. Well, we should be getting back to our table, he said, his tone dismissive. It was interesting seeing you, Evelyn. Try to enjoy the canapes. With a final triumphant smirk, he steered Bethany away, leaving Evelyn standing alone at the bar. My God, she was dreary, Bethany whispered once they were out of earshot. That dress looked like something my grandmother would wear to a funeral. You were married to that, a youthful mistake, Arthur said, waving a hand as if to erase the memory. She had no ambition, no understanding of how the world works. It's all about presentation, darling. Always has been. The life I have with you, he squeezed her arm, this is the life I was meant for. He glanced back across the ballroom. Evelyn was no longer at the bar. She had vanished back into the sea of anonymous faces, a plain grey stone swallowed by a glittering tide. He felt a surge of pride. He had shown her exactly what she had lost. He had stood before her, a titan of success, with a goddess on his arm, while she looked like a forgotten relic. He was completely, blissfully, and catastrophically unaware that the foundation of his entire triumphant moment, the very dress that symbolized his victory, was an intricate lie that was about to unravel his entire world. The Corinthian ballroom's opulence felt a world away from the quiet, ordered sanctuary of Evelyn's studio. Located on the third floor of a pre-war building in a district known more for its artisan bakeries than its high-fashion boutiques, the space was her haven. It was one large room with soaring ceilings and massive paned windows that flooded the space with the soft grey light of the city. One wall was covered in corkboard, a chaotic but meticulous collage of fabric swatches, charcoal sketches, and anatomical drawings of the human form in motion. Mannequins stood like silent sentinels, some bare others draped in muslin prototypes. Bolts of exquisite fabric, cashmere silk, charmeuse, and heavy wool crepe were stacked neatly on industrial shelving. The only sound was the gentle hum of her professional-grade sewing machine and the quiet scratch of a pencil against thick paper. Evelyn sat at her large drafting table, her back straight, the charcoal dress she'd worn to the gala still on. She wasn't designing, she was simply holding a pencil, staring at a blank sheet. The encounter with Arthur hadn't broken her, but it had left a deep, familiar ache. His words echoed in her mind, still keeping it simple, very practical. He had always used the word simple like a weapon, equating it with unambitious and lacking. He couldn't comprehend that for Evelyn, simplicity was the ultimate sophistication. It was about stripping away the non-essential to reveal the perfect line, the flawless cut, the soul of the garment. It was a philosophy she had poured into her work, into her life, and into the very brand she was building. A key turned in the lock and the door opened to reveal Finn O'Connell, her business partner and fiercely loyal friend. He was a whirlwind of creative energy, with a shock of red hair that refused to be tamed, and eyes that sparkled with mischief and intelligence. He took one look at her rigid posture and the untouched sketchbook and knew. So he said, setting 2 cups of coffee on the table, "You saw him." Evelyn finally looked up, her grey eyes clouded. And his fiancée, Bethany Cole. Ah, the Cole heiress. Of coal, mining and minerals. Of course, Finn said, his tone dripping with disdain. He leaned against the table. Let me guess. He was a complete ass. A small, wry smile touched Evelyn's lips. He hasn't changed. He mocked my dress. Finn glanced at her charcoal sheath. The Clara, one of our best sellers from the ready-to-wear line. The one that sold out in 3 days on Net-a-Porter. That dress, the very same Evelyn confirmed. He called it practical. Finn snorted. The man wouldn't know good design if it bit him on his perfectly tailored backside. What about the fiancée? What was she wearing? This was the question Evelyn had been dreading and anticipating. She took a slow sip of her coffee, the warmth a small comfort. She was wearing the Celeste. Finn froze his coffee cup halfway to his lips. He stared at her. The Celeste Wambig gown was not part of their ready-to-wear collection. It was a couture piece, a one-of-a-kind commission. It was the dress with the midnight silk and the hand-beaded gunmetal branch. It was to date the most ambitious, expensive, and difficult piece their small atelier had ever produced. No, Finn whispered, a slow grin spreading across his face. You're kidding me. She was wearing the dress. The very same, Evelyn repeated, a hint of the night's strange irony finally bubbling to the surface. She was very proud of it. Told me it was by an exclusive new designer called Aura. Finn threw his head back and roared with laughter. It was a loud, joyous sound that filled the quiet studio, chasing away the lingering ghosts of the ballroom. Oh, that is rich. That is poetic justice of the highest order. The man who mocked your clothes is paying a fortune to drape his new toy in them. He has no idea, does he? None whatsoever. Evelyn said, the tightness in her chest finally beginning to loosen. Aura was her creation born from the ashes of her marriage. When she and Arthur divorced, she had taken her settlement, a sum he'd considered a paltry but fair price to be rid of her, and poured every cent into this studio. She had made a conscious decision to separate her name, Evelyn Reed, from her work. Her name was tainted by its association with him, by the society pages that had painted her as his dowdy, uninteresting wife. She wanted her designs to stand on their own, and so Aura was born. It was anonymous, mysterious. There was no face to the brand, only a philosophy, understated, luxury, impeccable craftsmanship, and timeless design. Finn handled the business and marketing masterfully, building a cult following based on whispers and exclusivity. They started with a small, ready-to-wear collection, sold through a few high-end online retailers. The pieces, like the Clara dress Evelyn wore, were praised for their quality and cut. The couture line was a new, more ambitious venture. They took on only a handful of commissions, vetted through a discreet agent. The client never met the designer. All communication went through the agent, ensuring Evelyn's anonymity. The Celeste gown for Bethany Cole had been their biggest commission yet. Evelyn had spent over 200 hours on the beadwork alone, her fingers raw, her eyes strained, pouring her pain, her resilience, and her artistry into every tiny stitch. The dress was a piece of her soul. And you didn't say a word? Finn asked, his eyes dancing. Oh, to have been a fly on that wall. You just stood there and let him mock the Clara while his fiancée was wearing your masterpiece. What was I to say? Evelyn asked, her voice quiet. Arthur, you colossal fool. You just paid a down payment on a condominium for the dress your fiancée is wearing. And it was made by me, the woman you called worthless. Yes, that's exactly what you should have said, Finn exclaimed. I would have paid to see his face. No, Evelyn said, shaking her head. That's his game. Public scenes, grand gestures, humiliation. My success has nothing to do with him. Aura's success is about the work. It has to remain that way. Finn's expression softened. He understood. This wasn't about revenge for Evelyn, not in the way Arthur would understand it. This was about reclamation. It was about proving to herself that the part of her Arthur had tried to extinguish her creativity, her quiet strength, was actually her greatest asset. Okay, boss, he said gently. But you have to admit there's a certain delicious irony to it all. The irony is not lost on me, she admitted, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. She looked around her studio at the tools of her trade, the evidence of her hard work. This was her world, not the Corinthian ballroom, not Arthur Penhaligon's sphere of influence. She had spent years feeling small in his shadow. That night, for the first time, she realized she wasn't in his shadow at all. She was in her own light, a light so bright he couldn't even see it. He just saw a simple grey dress, while unknowingly basking in the glow of her true brilliant work. The game had changed, and Arthur didn't even know he was a player. In the weeks following the fundraiser, the name Aura became something of a mantra in the Penhaligon Cole household, or rather in the sleek, minimalist penthouse apartment Arthur had purchased in anticipation of his new life with Bethany. Bethany was obsessed. They say she's a total recluse, she said one evening, scrolling feverishly through a fashion blog on her tablet. She was lounging on a vast white sofa that had cost more than Evelyn's first car. The designer. No one has ever seen her. Some people think Aura is a collective of European artisans. Others say it's the secret side project of a famous, established designer who wants to be more experimental. Arthur grunted from behind his laptop. He was reviewing market analytics. His brow furrowed in concentration. A major energy stock he'd bet heavily on had taken a sudden sharp downturn, and it was making him nervous. As long as they keep making dresses that make you look good. Who cares, he said, not looking up. I care, Bethany retorted, tossing the tablet onto the cushion beside her. It's about more than the dress, Arthur. It's about the story, the mystery. Genevieve Dubois just mentioned them in her latest column. She called Aura the most exciting new voice in couture. The name Genevieve Dubois made Arthur pause. Dubois was the editor-in-chief of Elan, the undisputed Bible of the fashion world. Her word could make or break a brand overnight. If she was praising Aura, then Bethany's dress wasn't just a dress. It was a cultural artifact. Good, he said, trying to sound pleased. That means your investment paid off. I want another one, Bethany declared. Arthur finally looked up from his screen. Another one, Bethany. That dress cost a fortune. And it was worth every penny. I want Aura to design my wedding dress. Arthur's jaw tightened. The wedding was 6 months away, a lavish affair at her family's sprawling estate in the Hamptons. It was more than a wedding, it was a merger. The union of Penhaligon ambition and Cole old money. He was counting on the financial stability this marriage would bring him, especially now with his portfolio looking increasingly volatile. He needed to keep Bethany happy, but a custom Aura wedding gown, the cost would be astronomical. Darling, that's a wonderful idea, he said, forcing a smile. But you said yourself how hard it was to get the first one. Are you sure they even do wedding gowns? I've already had my father's assistant reach out to the agent. Bethany said, her tone triumphant. They're considering it. They want a design proposal and a full creative brief. They're playing hard to get, which only makes me want it more. Arthur felt a prickle of annoyance. He was a man who moved markets, who commanded respect. The idea of having to court some mysterious, faceless designer for the privilege of giving them an obscene amount of money was galling. It flew in the face of his entire worldview, where money and status were the keys that opened every door. It's just a dress, Bethany? He said, his patience wearing thin. No, it's the dress, she shot back, her voice rising. Don't you get it? This is our wedding. Genevieve Dubois will be there. Everyone will be there. I want to be wearing Aura. It says that we're on the inside, that we're ahead of the curve. Arthur sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He saw the logic in her argument. The wedding was a performance, and they needed the right costumes. An Aura gown would be a statement. It would cement their status as the city's new power couple. It was an investment in their brand. All right, he conceded. All right, see what their agent says. He returned to his laptop, but his concentration was broken. He thought back to the night of the gala, to Evelyn in her drab little dress. The contrast between her and Bethany had been so satisfying. Evelyn represented his past, quiet, unassuming, and in his mind utterly devoid of the hunger required to succeed. Bethany was his future bright bold, and draped in the very definition of success. Yet there was a nagging dissonance. Evelyn's calmness at the gala had been unsettling. She should have been devastated. She should have looked up at him with longing and regret. Instead, she had looked at him with something that almost resembled pity. It was absurd. What could she possibly have to pity him for? His phone buzzed. It was a market alert. The energy stock had dropped another 4%. A knot of cold dread tightened in his stomach. He was more exposed on this position than he'd let on to anyone, even Bethany. He had leveraged other assets to increase his stake, sure of a quick and massive return. It had been a gamble, a move to secure the kind of wealth that would finally place him beyond the reach of the old money snobbery of families like the Coles. Now that gamble was threatening to blow up in his face. He looked over at Bethany, who was once again lost in her tablet, happily pinning ideas for her aura-designed wedding. Her family's fortune was the safety net he was counting on. The wedding couldn't just happen. It had to be perfect. Her happiness was paramount. Suddenly, the aura dress wasn't just a frivolous expense anymore. It was a critical component of the plan. It was the price of keeping the dream alive. "Find out what they need," he said, his voice harder than before. "Whatever the cost, whatever they want, get it done." Bethany looked up, a radiant smile on her face. "I knew you'd understand." He didn't understand. Not really. He didn't understand the obsession, the mystery, or the power this invisible designer held. He just understood that in his world, which was beginning to show faint but terrifying cracks, appearances were everything. And the appearance of success, symbolized by a dress from a designer named Aura, was something he desperately needed to maintain. The name Aura began to spread through the elite circles of New York like a secret language. It was a whisper at cocktail parties, a name drop in the front rows of Fashion Week, a tag on the most exclusive social media accounts. The mystery surrounding the designer only fueled the brand's meteoric rise. Aura wasn't just fashion, it was a phenomenon. Finn was a master at stoking the flames. He orchestrated a series of calculated leaks and placements. A renowned actress was photographed at LAX wearing an Aura cashmere travel set, looking effortlessly chic. A French heiress was spotted in St. Bart's in a deceptively simple Aura linen sundress. Each piece was instantly recognizable by its cut and quality, yet devoid of any logo. The lack of branding became the brand. Then came the feature in Elan. Genevieve Dubois dedicated a full 2 pages to Aura, not with flashy photographs, but with elegant prose and artistic sketches of the designs. The article, titled "The Architecture of Silence," was a love letter to the brand's philosophy. In an age of deafening logos and celebrity-driven spectacle, Dubois wrote, "Aura is a radical act of quiet confidence." The anonymous designer, rumored to be a single fiercely private artisan, is not selling a name but a feeling. The garments are an intimate conversation between fabric and form. To wear Aura is not to scream, "Look at me," but to command attention with the sheer force of impeccable construction and understated grace. This is not fashion for the masses. It is armor for the discerning, a secret shared among those who understand that true luxury doesn't need to shout. Evelyn kept a copy of the magazine open on her desk. She had read the article a dozen times, each time feeling a thrill that was entirely her own. Armor for the discerning. Dubois understood. She understood what Evelyn was trying to do. The success was both exhilarating and terrifying. The demand was exploding. Finn was fielding calls from major department stores, from stylists, from investors, wanting to buy a piece of the mystery. "We're at a crossroads," Finn said one afternoon, pacing the studio floor. "We can't stay a 2-person operation forever. The ready-to-wear line needs to scale up or we'll be crushed by the demand. And the couture requests are insane." The crown princess of a minor European nation wants a gown for the royal wedding. Evelyn felt a wave of vertigo. A princess. It was all happening so fast. We're not ready for that kind of expansion, Finn. The quality is everything. If we scale up too quickly, we lose what makes Aura special. I know, he said, stopping to look at her, which is why we need to be strategic. I've found a small family-owned atelier in Italy that can handle a larger production run of the ready-to-wear line. The quality is superb. It would free you up to focus purely on the couture and the core design. It was a sensible solution, but Evelyn hesitated. It meant letting go, trusting others with her vision. It was another step out of the shadows and into a much larger world. Meanwhile, Arthur Penhaligon was also reading Genevieve Dubois' article. He'd found it on Bethany's nightstand. He read the words, "Quiet confidence, understated. Grace doesn't need to shout," and felt a strange sense of cognitive dissonance. They were concepts he associated with weakness, with his ex-wife. How could they possibly be the description of the world's most coveted luxury brand? It didn't compute. To him, luxury was a megaphone. It was a Bugatti, a Patek Philippe, a front-row seat. It was loud, but the world, at least this influential corner of it, was telling him he was wrong. "Did you see Bethany?" asked, coming into the room, wrapped in a silk robe. "She called us the discerning." She had completely co-opted the brand's identity as her own. In her mind, by wearing Aura, she was Aura. "I saw," Arthur said, closing the magazine. "Their agent has been in touch, by the way." Bethany squealed with delight. "And what did they say about the wedding dress?" Arthur felt a familiar pang of annoyance at having to report the news. "They're particular. They've agreed to consider the commission. But they have terms." "Terms? What terms?" "First, a non-refundable design deposit of $50,000, just to create the initial sketches." Bethany didn't even blink. To her, it was a rounding error. To Arthur, whose finances were becoming more precarious by the day, it was a gut punch. "Second," he continued, his voice tight, "the designer Aura insists on a private meeting with the bride, alone, to understand her essence before beginning the design process." "A meeting?" Bethany gasped. "A real meeting?" "With Aura." "Oh my God, Arthur. No one gets to meet Aura." "I'll be the first. What will I wear? What will I say?" She was already spiraling into a vortex of excited preparation. Arthur, however, was stuck on the absurdity of the situation. This phantom designer was now dictating terms to him, summoning his fiancée, like a queen summoning a courtier. "The meeting is to be held at the designer's private atelier," he added, reading from the agent's email on his phone. "No photographs, no companions, and the location will only be disclosed 24 hours in advance. A non-disclosure agreement is required." "It's all so mysterious, so chic." Bethany swooned. "This is perfect. Absolutely perfect." Arthur watched her, a cold feeling creeping up his spine. The world was changing, and the rules he had always played by seemed to be shifting under his feet. Power, he was discovering, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was silent. Sometimes it was a mysterious, unseen woman who could command a $50,000 deposit for a sketch and summon the city's most sought-after heiress to a secret meeting. He hated it. He hated the feeling of not being in control. But he was trapped. He needed the Cole family money, and the price of that was Bethany's happiness, and the price of her happiness was now inextricably linked to this ghost named Aura. Unbeknownst to him, in a quiet studio across town, the ghost was preparing for the meeting. Evelyn stood before a mannequin draped in ivory silk. She was sketching not a wedding dress, but a plan for a conversation. She felt a strange sense of calm. She wasn't nervous about meeting the woman who had replaced her. She was curious. This wasn't about revenge. It was about research. Bethany Cole was the embodiment of the world Arthur had wanted Evelyn to be a part of. To design the ultimate dress for her, Evelyn needed to understand that world, not as an outsider, but from the inside. She needed to understand the woman Arthur had chosen. She needed to understand what he valued. And in doing so, Perhaps she could finally fully understand why he had never valued her. The day of the meeting arrived cloaked in a shroud of secrecy that Bethany found thrilling and Arthur found deeply irritating. A black car dispatched by the Aura agent arrived at their penthouse precisely at 2 o'clock. Bethany, having spent the entire morning agonizing over her outfit, finally settled on a Dior pantsuit, powerful but respectful, and emerged looking like she was about to negotiate a corporate merger. "I can't believe you're not allowed to come," she said to Arthur, for the 10th time adjusting the collar of her jacket. "Just remember what we talked about." Arthur said, his tone that of a coach sending a player into the big game. "Be charming, emphasize the prestige of the wedding, the guest list. Make sure this Aura person understands that this isn't just any commission, it's a career-making opportunity." Bethany rolled her eyes. "I think Aura is already doing just fine, Arthur. Try not to worry. I'll be back in a few hours, hopefully, with a wedding dress in the works." She kissed him on the cheek and swept out of the apartment. Arthur watched from the window as the black car pulled away, a small, dark vessel disappearing into the city's vast circulatory system. He felt completely powerless, a feeling he utterly despised. He paced the length of his living room, the polished floor reflecting his agitated form. To distract himself, he decided to do what he did best: investigate. He opened his laptop and typed Aura Designer Atelier location into the search bar. The results were, as expected, fruitless. Message boards were filled with speculation, but there was no concrete information. The brand's digital footprint was a masterclass in controlled anonymity. Frustrated, he called a man he knew named Patrick, a private investigator he occasionally used for discreet corporate due diligence. Patrick was expensive, but he was good. "Patrick," Arthur said, his voice clipped. "I have a small personal project for you. It's time sensitive." "Name it," came the gruff reply. "A fashion brand. Aura. I want to know who is behind it. I want a name, an address, a history, everything. Aura." Patrick sounded surprised. "That's a tough one, Mr. Penhaligon. They're famously airtight." "Everyone has a weakness," Arthur snapped. "Follow the money. The corporate filings. The agent they use. The car service they hired today. I want an answer by the end of the day." "It'll cost you," Patrick warned. "Just get it done," Arthur said, and hung up. Meanwhile, Bethany's car was weaving its way out of the familiar territory of Midtown and into a neighborhood she rarely, if ever, ventured into. The skyscrapers gave way to older, more uniform buildings of brick and stone. The storefronts changed from global luxury brands to independent bookstores and small artisanal shops. The car finally stopped in front of an unassuming grey stone building with a discreet black-painted door. There was no sign, no plaque. A woman in a simple, elegant black dress was waiting. "Miss Cole," she asked politely. "This way, please." Bethany was led through the door and up 3 flights of stairs. The air grew quieter with each step. The woman opened a final door and gestured for Bethany to enter. "Aura will be with you shortly." Bethany stepped inside and the door closed softly behind her, leaving her alone. The room was breathtaking. It was not the opulent, velvet-draped salon she had imagined. It was a working studio, vast, airy, and filled with light. Bolts of fabric were stacked like a library of textures. Sketches were pinned to a wall. Mannequins stood in thoughtful poses. The room smelled of clean linen charcoal and something floral like jasmine tea. It felt sacred. She wandered deeper into the room, running her hand over a bolt of heavy silk. The quality was undeniable. She saw a dress in progress on one of the mannequins, a column of deep emerald green, its seams pinned with surgical precision. This was a place of serious work. "Miss Cole, thank you for coming." The voice was quiet, calm, and came from behind her. Bethany turned. Standing there was a woman. She was dressed simply in tailored black trousers and a soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater. Her hair was pulled back, and her face was intelligent and serene. She looked familiar, but Bethany couldn't place her. There was an air of quiet authority about her, but she wasn't what Bethany had expected at all. She had pictured some flamboyant, eccentric artist. This woman was composed. "You're Aura?" Bethany asked, a little thrown. "I am the designer behind Aura," the woman said with a small, polite smile. She did not offer her name. "Please have a seat. Can I offer you some tea?" They sat in two simple but elegant armchairs near the large windows. The woman Aura poured tea into delicate ceramic cups. She moved with an unhurried grace that Bethany found both calming and slightly intimidating. "Your celestial magic gown was a pleasure to create." Aura began, her voice smooth and even. The beadwork was inspired by the hoarfrost on winter branches. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned," Bethany said, meaning it sincerely. Everyone was captivated by it. "Good design shouldn't captivate," Aura corrected gently. "It should liberate. It should feel like the purest version of yourself." She looked at Bethany with discerning eyes. "Tell me about the wedding, not the venue or the guest list. Tell me how you want to feel on that day." The question caught Bethany off guard. No other designer had ever asked her that. They asked about silhouettes, necklines, fabrics. They asked about trends. Arthur had told her to talk about status, about making a statement. But this quiet, intense woman was asking about her feelings. For the next hour they talked, or rather Bethany talked. Prodded by Aura's insightful, gentle questions, she found herself speaking not just about the wedding, but about her life. She spoke of the pressure of being a Cole, the constant expectation to be perfect, to be dazzling. She admitted that sometimes the galas and the parties felt like a performance, and that she wasn't always sure who she was when the costume came off. She had never spoken this way to anyone, least of all to Arthur. The designer listened patiently, her grey eyes watchful and intelligent. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were perceptive, cutting through the noise to the heart of the matter. "It seems to me," Aura said finally, as the light outside began to fade, "that you are caught between wanting to be a monument and wanting to be a woman. The world expects you to be a monument. Your dress should allow you to be a woman." Bethany stared at her, mesmerized. "Yes," she whispered. "That's it. That's exactly it." As she was leaving, feeling lighter and more understood than she had in years, a thought struck her. The designer's face was still naggingly familiar. "Have we met before?" Bethany asked at the door. Aura's calm expression didn't waver. "I'm not a very social person. I doubt our paths would have crossed." The answer was smooth, definitive. Bethany let it go. Back in the penthouse, Arthur was pacing like a caged tiger. His phone finally rang. It was Patrick. "You're not going to believe this," the investigator said, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. "Aura is registered as a sole proprietorship. I had to pull property deeds and utility records for the atelier address the car service dropped at. The owner of the brand, the sole designer, the woman who owns that studio, her name is Evelyn Reed." Arthur froze. The world tilted on its axis. "What did you say, Evelyn Reed? As in your ex-wife?" Arthur sank onto the sofa, the phone slipping from his numb fingers and clattering onto the marble floor. Evelyn, Evelyn dreary, simple, practical Evelyn. The woman he had mocked, pitied, and discarded. It was impossible. It was a joke, a mistake. But as the pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed, he knew it was true. Her hobby, her quiet nature, her strange, placid reaction at the gala. Her comment, "Practicality has its merits. It lasts." And the dress, the celeste gown, his symbol of triumph, of trading up. He had paid his ex-wife, the woman he considered a failure, a small fortune to make his new fiancée look like a queen. The humiliation was so profound, so complete, it felt like a physical blow. Just then, the door opened. Bethany swept in, her face glowing. "Arthur, it was incredible. She's a genius, an absolute genius. You should have heard the things she said. She just, she gets it. She gets me, she gushed. Arthur looked at her, at the woman he was pinning all his hopes on, and all he could see was the ghost of his wife. He had sent Bethany into the lion's den, and she had come back calling the lion a visionary. She's going to design the dress, Bethany announced, beaming. And Arthur, I think it's going to be the most beautiful dress in the world. Arthur couldn't speak. He just stared, his mind a maelstrom of rage, shock, and a dawning, sickening sense of dread. The trap had been sprung, and he had walked right into it. The weeks leading up to the Metropolitan Fashion Vanguard Awards were a blur of activity for everyone involved, though for vastly different reasons. For Evelyn, it was a period of intense, focused creation. After her meeting with Bethany, she had designed a wedding dress that was, by all accounts, a masterpiece. It was not the monumental, attention-grabbing gown Bethany thought she wanted. Instead, it was a study in vulnerability and strength, made of a heavy liquid silk crepe that moved like water. It had long, clean lines, a dramatic sweeping back, and sleeves so delicately embroidered with tiny seed pearl blossoms that they seemed to have grown there. It was a dress for a woman, not an heiress. Bethany had wept when she saw the sketches. But beyond the wedding dress, bigger news was brewing. Genevieve Dubois, having championed Aura from the beginning, had used her considerable influence. Aura was to be presented with the Emerging Designer of the Year award at the upcoming Vanguard ceremony, the most prestigious event on the fashion calendar. The one condition of accepting the award was that the designer behind Aura would finally have to reveal their identity. Finn had argued for it passionately. This is it, Ev. This is the moment. You can't stay a ghost forever. You've built the foundation. The work speaks for itself. Now it's time to claim it. It's time for Evelyn Reed to take a bow. Evelyn, after much soul-searching, agreed. It was time. Her anonymity had served its purpose. It had protected her, allowed her to build her business on merit alone. Now, stepping into the light felt less like a risk and more like a final necessary step in her own liberation. For Arthur, those same weeks were a private hell. The knowledge that Evelyn was Aura festered inside him like a poison. Every excited mention of the brand from Bethany, every gushing compliment about the mysterious designer's genius was a fresh twist of the knife. He was trapped in a farce of his own making. His fiancée was idolizing his ex-wife, and he was footing the bill. His financial situation had also worsened. The energy stock had collapsed, wiping out a significant portion of his capital. He was now more dependent than ever on his marriage to Bethany. He couldn't afford to rock the boat. He couldn't expose Evelyn without exposing his own foolishness, without destroying Bethany's happiness, and with it his own financial salvation. So he said nothing. He smiled, he nodded, he played the part of the proud, supportive fiancé, while inside he was consumed by a helpless rage. He tried to subtly poison the well. "Are you sure about the dress, darling?" he'd ask. "It seems a bit simple in the sketches." "It's not simple. Arthur, it's sublime." Bethany would counter completely under Evelyn's spell. Aura says that true elegance is quiet. The words were Evelyn's, and hearing them from Bethany's lips was a unique form of torture. The night of the Vanguard Awards arrived. It was the social apex of the season, held at the Museum of Modern Art. The red carpet was a river of flashbulbs and couture. Arthur stood stiffly beside Bethany, his smile a tight, painful rictus. Bethany was a vision. She was wearing another custom Aura creation for the event, a gown of shimmering, pewter-colored silk, elegant and striking. She was once again the center of attention. "Isn't it thrilling?" she whispered to him as they took their seats in the grand auditorium. "They say Aura is going to be revealed tonight when she accepts her award. We'll finally get to see her." Arthur felt a cold sweat prickle his brow. He knew what was coming. He could have warned Bethany, could have saved her the public shock. But a dark, selfish part of him wanted her to feel the same humiliation he felt. If he was going down, he wouldn't go down alone. The ceremony began. Awards were presented, speeches were made. Finally, Genevieve Dubois took the stage to present the award for Emerging Designer of the Year. The room fell silent. There are moments in fashion. Genevieve began her voice resonating through the auditorium, when a new voice emerges that is so clear, so confident, and so utterly original that it changes the conversation. This year, that voice belongs to Aura. A montage of Aura's designs flashed on the giant screens. The actress at the airport, the French heiress, and finally, a stunning editorial shot of the Celeste gown. Bethany gasped and squeezed Arthur's arm. "That's my dress." Aura has reminded us, Genevieve continued, that craftsmanship is not old-fashioned, that silence can be more powerful than noise, and that a garment's true value lies not in its label, but in its soul. The designer built this brand from the ground up on her own terms, letting the work speak for itself. She is a testament to resilience, to the quiet power of artistry in a world obsessed with fame. Arthur felt his collar grow tight. Genevieve was telling Evelyn's story, his story, but from a very different perspective. It is my profound honor to announce that the winner of the 2025 Emerging Designer of the Year award is Aura, and the incredible woman behind it, Ms. Evelyn Reed. The name hung in the air for a moment. There was a smattering of confused applause. Evelyn Reed. The name was unfamiliar to most. And then, from a side aisle, Evelyn emerged. She was wearing a simple, exquisitely cut black jumpsuit of her own design. Her hair was down, falling softly around her shoulders. She looked poised, confident, and serene. She looked nothing like the drab, defeated woman Arthur had painted in his memory. She looked like a creator, a powerhouse. The camera projecting her image onto the screens panned for reactions in the audience. It found Bethany Cole. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked from the screen to the stage, and then to the man beside her, her face a mask of confusion. And then, the camera found Arthur. His face was pale, his expression frozen in a silent scream of utter abject horror. The two shots, the shocked fiancé and the humiliated ex-husband, were broadcast for the entire fashion world to see. Bethany turned to him, her eyes flashing with a million questions. But before she could speak, Evelyn reached the podium. She looked out at the crowd, her calm, grey eyes sweeping over the room, until for a brief, searing moment, they met Arthur's. There was no triumph in her gaze, no malice. There was only a quiet finality. She leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you, Genevieve and the Vanguard Committee. They say to build something new, you first have to tear down the old. I'd like to thank my ex-husband, Arthur Penhaligon. He taught me through his own actions the profound importance of self-worth. He was the one who first showed me that judging a woman by the simplicity of her clothes is a fool's game. Because you never know. She might have designed the dress your fiancé is wearing." A collective gasp went through the auditorium. It was a perfectly delivered, devastatingly elegant coup de grace. Every eye in the room swiveled from Evelyn on the stage to Arthur and Bethany. Bethany looked down at her pewter gown as if it had caught fire. The humiliation was absolute, public, and inescapable. She stared at Arthur not with confusion anymore, but with the cold, hard light of dawning comprehension and utter betrayal. Arthur didn't see her look. He was just staring at the stage, at the woman he had so casually discarded. She hadn't just built an empire from the ashes of their marriage. She had used his own arrogance as the blueprint. And she had just unveiled her masterpiece on the biggest stage in the world, leaving him buried in the rubble. The aftermath of the Vanguard Awards was a nuclear winter for Arthur Penhaligon. The story was simply too juicy to be ignored. It had everything: a scorned wife's triumphant return, a clueless heiress, and a pompous, arrogant husband receiving his public comeuppance. The gossip columns and fashion blogs feasted on it for weeks. They called it the Aura Affair and the Penhaligon Predicament. Photos of Arthur's horrified face and Bethany's shocked expression were juxtaposed with images of Evelyn's serene, powerful acceptance speech. The ride back to the penthouse was a silent, glacial affair. Bethany sat on the far side of the limousine, her arms crossed her aura gown, looking like a cruel joke. Arthur tried to speak, to formulate a defense, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? I'm sorry I mocked my ex-wife while secretly making you her biggest patron. I'm sorry, I'm a fool. When they arrived, Bethany didn't even look at him. She walked straight to the guest bedroom and locked the door. The next morning, her father, a formidable man, with cold, calculating eyes, arrived with two of his lawyers. The meeting was short and brutal. The engagement was off. All financial ties between the Coles and Arthur were severed. Mr. Cole made it icily clear that Arthur's name was now poison in their world. The wedding, the merger, the financial safety net, it all vanished in an instant. Left alone in the sterile white penthouse that now felt like a mausoleum, Arthur's world fully collapsed. The loss of the Cole fortune meant his creditors, who had been patient in anticipation of his marriage, came calling. The leveraged bets on the energy stock became an anchor, pulling him down into a sea of debt. Within 3 months, he was forced to sell the penthouse, his car, and his collection of expensive watches. The Tom Ford suits were replaced by off-the-rack replacements. The Titan of finance was reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at the same parties he used to command. He saw Evelyn one last time months later. It was a chance encounter on a busy street. He was rushing to a job interview for a mid-level analyst position. She was stepping out of a black car, looking effortlessly chic in a camel-colored aura coat on her way into a building that probably housed her new expanded headquarters. Their eyes met across the sidewalk. He saw no pity, no gloating. He saw nothing at all. To her, he was just a man in a crowd, a ghost from a past she had long since moved beyond. That indifference was more painful than any hatred could ever be. Evelyn's world, in contrast, was dawning. Revealing her identity had been like throwing gasoline on the fire of her success. Aura, now attached to the compelling story of Evelyn Reed, became the most sought-after brand in the world. Investors lined up, but she chose her partners carefully, retaining full creative control. She opened a flagship store in Soho, a minimalist temple to her design philosophy. She accepted the commission from the European princess. Her brand became synonymous with intelligent, empowered luxury. She never spoke of Arthur publicly again. Her speech at the awards had been the first and last word on the matter. It wasn't a story she needed to tell. It was a foundation she had built upon. One evening, months after the awards, she was in her new larger studio working late. The space was beautiful, overlooking the city lights. Finn came in with 2 cups of tea, a ritual that had remained unchanged. The final numbers for the quarter are in, he said, setting a cup on her desk. We've exceeded our projections by 200%. That's good, Evelyn said, smiling, but her eyes were on a sketch in front of her. Just good, Finn teased, leaning against the desk. Ev, we're building an empire. She looked up at him, her grey eyes clear and bright. We're building beautiful things, Finn. That's what matters. She took a sip of her tea. The empire is just a happy consequence. He watched her for a moment, the woman he had seen at her lowest, now so firmly at her highest. Her success wasn't a revenge story, he realized. Revenge is a hot, messy, finite emotion. This was different. This was a story of creation. She hadn't focused on destroying Arthur's world. She had been too busy building her own. His collapse was merely a side effect of her rise, a shadow cast by her growing light. Evelyn looked out the vast window at the glittering cityscape. She had once felt so small in this city, invisible beside a man who demanded all the light for himself. Now she knew the truth. The brightest light doesn't need to be demanded. It simply needs to be created. And from now on, she would be the one to create it. And so Arthur Penhaligon became a footnote in Evelyn Reed's incredible story. He learnt the hard way that a person's worth is not defined by the label on their clothes, but by the substance of their character and the strength of their spirit. Evelyn's triumph wasn't just in her success, but in her refusal to become like the man who wronged her. She found her power not in public revenge, but in the quiet, undeniable excellence of her work. Her story is a powerful reminder that the people we underestimate are often the ones with the most extraordinary things to show the world. What did you think of Evelyn's ultimate comeback? Was it a perfect act of poetic justice, or would you have wanted a more direct confrontation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives.
He had the perfect life, the perfect job, and the perfect fiancée, a woman he called a real catch. To build her up, he had to tear his ex-wife down, painting her as a mousy, unambitious woman he'd thankfully outgrown. His friends believed him. His fiancée adored him, and his world was secure. But a single sun-drenched afternoon changed everything. One glimpse of his forgotten ex-wife standing on the deck of a billionaire's super yacht didn't just shatter his narrative, it exposed a lie so profound it threatened to destroy the perfect world he'd so carefully constructed. Ethan Vanderbilt moved through the world with the practiced ease of a man who believed in his own marketing. At 36, he was a senior vice president at a boutique investment firm, a position that sounded more impressive than it was, but afforded him a life of tailored suits, overpriced cocktails, and a carefully curated circle of acquaintances who reflected his own perceived success. He wasn't owed money, a fact that gnawed at him in quiet moments, but he had mastered the art of appearing as if he were. His charisma was a weapon, his smile a shield, and his new fiancée, Olivia Davies, was the crown jewel of his collection. Olivia was by all accounts flawless. She was 10 years younger, with a cascade of blonde hair that seemed to catch the light just so, and a laugh that tinkled like wind chimes. Her family, the Davies of Connecticut, had the kind of quiet, unstated wealth that Ethan craved. They had a summer home, not a beach house, and spoke of Europe in seasons, not cities. Olivia herself was sweet, perpetually agreeable, and looked at Ethan with a wide-eyed adoration that fed his ego like oxygen to a fire. To his friends, he described her as the total package, a real catch. It was a line he repeated often at dinner parties on the golf course and in the hushed, smoky corners of exclusive bars. But to truly appreciate the masterpiece that was Olivia, Ethan felt it was necessary to display the rough, discarded canvas of his past. That canvas was his ex-wife, Elara Walsh. In the 5 years since their divorce, Ethan had meticulously rewritten the history of their decade-long marriage. He painted a portrait of a woman who was sweet but simple, supportive but stagnant. Elara was comfortable. He'd tell his friends Liam Kennedy and Noah Sinclair over a game of squash. He'd pause, letting the word hang in the air, imbuing it with the weight of mediocrity. She was my starter wife. You know, the one you have when you're still figuring things out. She was content with our little rented apartment, her little admin job. She had no drive, no ambition well beyond me. Liam, a sturdy, good-natured architect who had known Ethan since college, would nod along, though a flicker of unease sometimes crossed his face. He remembered Elara differently. He remembered her quick wit, her fierce loyalty, the way she could gently deflate Ethan's ego with a single, well-placed joke. But Ethan was his friend, and loyalty was Liam's defining trait. Noah, on the other hand, was a journalist with a practiced cynicism. He'd watch Ethan perform his monologue, his eyes sharp and analytical. He found Ethan's constant need for validation tiresome. "What's she up to now?" Noah had asked once, a few years back. Ethan had shrugged, a perfect pantomime of detached benevolence. Honestly, I have no idea. I made sure she was taken care of course. He'd lied. The divorce had been anything but generous. He had leveraged his financial acumen and Alara's emotional exhaustion to leave her with next to nothing. But we were just on different tracks. I was accelerating and she was parked. I hope she's happy, I really do. Probably still at that same desk making copies. This was the narrative he cemented, not just for his friends, but for Olivia. He needed her to understand the journey he had undertaken, the dead weight he had been forced to shed in order to become the man she deserved. I couldn't grow with her, he told Olivia one night, his voice a low, intimate murmur, as they lay in the bed of their gleaming minimalist apartment overlooking the city. It was like she was an anchor. I'd talk about wanting to take risks, to build something, and she'd just get this look on her face, fear. She was afraid of success. You thrive on it. You push me. You get it. Olivia, wrapped in his arms, felt a surge of pride. She was the one who got him. She was the dynamic, forward-moving partner he required. She had never met Alara, but the image Ethan painted was vivid, a mousy, timid woman in a beige cardigan, forever looking backward, while Ethan strode gallantly into the future. It was a sad story, and it made her love him all the more for having overcome it. The divorce itself had been a quiet affair, finalized on a grey Tuesday. Alara had been pale and silent, signing the papers with a hand that trembled slightly. Ethan had interpreted her silence as acquiescence, her weariness as defeat. He had taken the apartment, the savings, the momentum. He had left her with a few boxes of personal effects and a palpable sense of relief. He was free. He was ascending. He never looked back, because in his mind there was nothing there worth seeing. He was Ethan Vanderbilt, and his kingdom built on the ghost of a forgotten marriage was finally perfect. Ethan's campaign to establish Olivia as the ultimate human achievement was relentless and pervasive. It wasn't enough for his friends to simply meet her. They had to understand her significance, her value, her superiority in the grand narrative of his life. He wasn't just in love. He was a connoisseur who had acquired a priceless work of art, and he insisted on giving everyone a guided tour. The primary exhibition hall for this tour was the new apartment he and Olivia shared. It was a space that screamed new money, with stark white walls, a sprawling modular sofa, and a kitchen island the size of a small car. They hosted a dinner party, a housewarming of sorts. Liam and his wife Chloe came, as did Noah, who arrived stag and armed with a bottle of wine that was just expensive enough to be polite. Ethan was in his element, a conductor orchestrating the evening. "Liv, honey, tell them about the Nantucket fundraiser," he prompted, placing a proprietary hand on the small of her back. Olivia blushed prettily. "Oh, it was nothing, really. My mother ropes me into these things. We were just trying to raise some money for the children's literacy program." "Nothing," Ethan boomed, laughing, as if she'd told the most charmingly self-deprecating joke. "She raised over $200,000 in one night. The woman's a force of nature. She just has this grace. People want to be around her. It's a world away from what I was used to." He didn't say Alara's name, but he didn't have to. The ghost was always present, a convenient shadow that made Olivia's light seem all the brighter. Later, while Olivia was showing Chloe the apartment's walk-in closet, Ethan leaned in conspiratorially toward Liam and Noah. "See what I mean, class? It's effortless. Her family has a table at every important event. The connections are unbelievable. It's a different stratosphere. Remember those potlucks Alara used to host with what was it? The seven-layer dip. Liam shifted uncomfortably. He remembered those potlucks. He remembered laughing so hard with Alara over a burned batch of brownies that he'd gotten tears in his eyes. He remembered the warmth and the lack of pretense, a stark contrast to the current sterile environment where he was afraid to set his glass down without a coaster. "They were fun, Ethan," he said mildly. Ethan waved a dismissive hand. "Fun for what they were. But this is the big leagues. Olivia understands the importance of image of building a network. Alara just wanted to nest." The word was delivered like an epithet. Noah took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes missing nothing. He saw the way Olivia, upon rejoining them, glanced at Ethan for approval. He saw the subtle tension in her shoulders when Ethan launched into another story that began with, "I never could have done this before." He wondered if she ever got tired of being a walking, talking testament to her fiancé's upgrade. The campaign continued on the golf course a few weeks later. It was a Saturday, crisp and sunny. As they walked the fairway, Ethan was on a roll, complaining about a deal at work before seamlessly pivoting. "Thank God I have Liv to come home to. She just gets the pressure. We can talk for hours about strategy, about ambition. She's as sharp as I am." "That's great, man," Liam said, lining up his shot. "It's everything," Ethan insisted, his voice hardening slightly. "You have no idea what it's like to be with someone who doesn't get it. Someone who looks at your ambition like it's a flaw. Everything was a negotiation. Why do you have to work late? Why do we have to go to this networking event?" It was exhausting. Noah, who had been quiet for most of the game, finally spoke. "You know, I bumped into Alara's sister the other day at the market." Ethan's posture stiffened. "Oh, yeah. Yeah. Asked how Alara was doing. She said she was good, working on some new project. Sounded happy." A flicker of something dark and unpleasant crossed Ethan's face before being replaced by his usual mask of patronizing charm. "Good for her. I mean that. I hope she's doing okay. Probably still doing that little admin thing for that dental supply company. It suited her. Low stress, you know." He then turned to Liam. "Speaking of stress, you will not believe the hoops Liv is jumping through for this wedding. Her mother wants a full-string quartet." "A quartet. But hey, whatever my queen wants, she gets. She's a real catch. The real deal, worth every string." Liam and Noah exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance. It was a look that acknowledged the shared experience of listening to the Gospel of Olivia, as delivered by its most fervent and perhaps most insecure preacher. Ethan saw himself as a man who had finally arrived, who had secured the perfect partner. But to Noah, it was beginning to sound less like a man celebrating his future, and more like a man desperately trying to bury his past under an avalanche of praise. He was building a cathedral to his new life, but he never stopped checking to make sure the foundations laid over the ruins of his old one were still holding. The setting was St. Bart's, a jewel in the Caribbean. The occasion was Liam's 40th birthday, a milestone that demanded more than just a steak dinner back home. Liam, Chloe, Noah, and a few other friends had pooled their resources to charter a handsome 45-foot catamaran for a long weekend. Ethan, of course, had insisted on paying a larger share, a gesture that was less about generosity and more about asserting his status as the group's most successful member. The first day was idyllic, a perfect postcard of paradise. The turquoise water was bathtub warm, the sky an endless, cloudless blue. Champagne, personally selected by Ethan, flowed freely. Olivia was in her element, resplendent in a white bikini and oversized sunglasses, artfully composing selfies against the stunning backdrop. She laughed her tinkling laugh as Ethan regaled the group with a story about a hilarious mix-up with their reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant. A story whose sole purpose was to mention that they had been dining at a Michelin-starred restaurant. "To Liam," Ethan bellowed, raising his glass. 40 years young. He draped an arm around Olivia, pulling her close. "And to friends, old and new. I've got to say, life doesn't get much better than this." He surveyed the scene, the boat, the sea, the beautiful woman at his side, with the smug satisfaction of a king reviewing his domain. He felt invincible. It was in that precise moment of supreme self-satisfaction that it happened. Another vessel appeared on the horizon, moving with a silent, inexorable grace. To call it a boat was an insult. It was a super yacht, a floating palace of gleaming white fiberglass and tinted black glass, at least 200 feet long. It was a vision of obscene wealth, a behemoth that made their chartered catamaran feel like a child's bath toy. As it glided past, perhaps 100 yards away, the soft strains of sophisticated lounge music drifted across the water. Everyone on the catamaran fell silent, gawking. It was the kind of vessel they'd only ever seen in movies or on the Instagram feeds of celebrities. "My God," Chloe whispered, shielding her eyes. "Who even owns something like that?" Noah, ever the journalist, zoomed in with his phone camera. "Let's see if we can catch the name." But then he froze, his hand lowered slowly. "Forget the name," he said, his voice a low whistle. "You guys need to see this." On the sprawling aft deck of the super yacht, a small group of people were mingling. And standing among them, holding a champagne flute, was a woman. Her back was initially to them, but then she turned, throwing her head back in a laugh that was silent from this distance, but clearly full of genuine mirth. She was wearing a simple navy blue sundress that fluttered in the sea breeze. Her auburn hair, which Ethan remembered her always pulling back in a severe practical bun, was down-styled in loose waves that caught the afternoon sun like fire. She wasn't just pretty, she was radiant luminous. She possessed an aura of unshakable confidence, a relaxed power that was more arresting than any conventional beauty. It was Alara Walsh. A man beside her, tall and elegantly dressed in linen trousers and a crisp shirt, placed a familiar proprietary arm around her waist. He leaned in and murmured something in her ear, and she smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. The man was Sebastian Thorne. Not just a rich man, but the rich man. A reclusive, almost mythical figure in the tech world who had revolutionized data security and was reportedly worth billions. He wasn't some paunchy old money inheritor. He was a contemporary titan, sharp and respected. On the catamaran, the party was over. The champagne in their glasses might as well have been vinegar. Liam's jaw was literally hanging open. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. Noah just stared, a slow, disbelieving grin spreading across his face. He lowered his phone and looked directly at Ethan. But it was Olivia's reaction that was the most telling. Her perfect smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of pure confusion. Her eyes darted from the impossible vision on the yacht to the face of her fiancé. Ethan stood as if he'd been turned to stone. The blood drained from his face, leaving his sun-kissed tan looking sallow and sick. His mind, usually so quick with a boast or a dismissal, was a blank, short-circuiting mess. He saw the woman. He saw the man. He saw the yacht and the carefully constructed kingdom he had built in his mind, with its narratives of superiority and its ghosts of mediocrity, was hit by a tidal wave. This wasn't the mousy, unambitious starter wife in a beige cardigan. This wasn't the woman who was afraid of success, who was content making copies at a dental supply company. This was a different person entirely. Or worse, this was the person she had been all along, and he had simply been too blind, too arrogant, too self-absorbed to see it. The silence on the boat was absolute, broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves. On the super yacht, Elara, blissfully unaware of her audience, turned with Sebastian Thorne and disappeared through a sliding glass door into the yacht's cool, impossibly luxurious interior, leaving a boatload of stunned spectators and one utterly humiliated man in her wake. The atmosphere on the catamaran for the rest of the afternoon was thick with unspoken thoughts. The sun still shone. The sea was still a brilliant turquoise, but the celebratory mood had evaporated, replaced by a tense, awkward silence. Ethan had retreated into a surly quiet, hiding behind his sunglasses and offering clipped one-word answers to any attempts at conversation. He nursed a single glass of champagne, his knuckles white around the stem. Olivia tried to salvage the day, attempting a light-hearted conversation with Chloe about wedding plans, but her voice lacked its usual effervescence. She kept casting worried, questioning glances at Ethan, who seemed to have erected an invisible wall around himself. She had witnessed him being smug, charming, arrogant, and passionate, but she had never before seen him look so small. The image of Elara, so poised, so radiant, so clearly at home, in a world of unimaginable luxury, had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. The story she had been told about this woman suddenly felt thin, flimsy, like a script with a gaping plot hole. That evening, they had a reservation at a high-end restaurant built into the cliffside overlooking the harbor. The view was breathtaking, but the tension from the afternoon had followed them to shore. Everyone was making a strenuous effort to be normal, discussing Liam's birthday gift and the plan for the next day, but the conversation was stilted, punctuated by silences that were just a little too long. The elephant in the room wasn't just an elephant. It was a blue-water super yacht. It was Noah, predictably, who decided to address it. He waited for a lull, then leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass with a calculated casualness. So, he began, his voice deceptively mild. "Wild seeing Elara today, huh? She seems to be doing exceptionally well for herself." Ethan, who had been pushing a piece of tuna around his plate, looked up. His eyes, when he finally met Noah's gaze, were cold with fury. "It's a flash in the pan," he snapped, his voice louder than intended, causing a nearby table to glance over. "Is it?" Noah pressed, undeterred. Sebastian Thorne doesn't exactly seem like the flash-in-the-pan type. The guy is practically a recluse. You don't see him splashing his flings all over the tabloids. "She's a gold digger." Ethan spat the venom in his voice, shocking everyone, most of all Olivia. "It's the oldest story in the book. A pretty woman finds a rich man to solve her problems. A guy like that gets bored easily. Trust me, I know her. She was never that interesting. She doesn't have the depth to keep a man like that entertained for long." The cruelty of his words hung in the air, ugly and stark. He wasn't just dismissing her success. He was actively trying to diminish her character, to paint her as manipulative and shallow. Liam, ever the peacemaker, tried to intervene. "Ethan, come on, man. Let's just drop it. We're here to celebrate." But Noah wasn't done. He wasn't being malicious. He was genuinely fascinated, a journalist pulling at a thread that was rapidly unraveling a much larger story. "I don't know, Ethan," he countered, his tone now serious. "I didn't get gold digger from that. She didn't look like she was clinging to him. She looked Powerful, happy, genuinely happy. He paused, then delivered the final blow. She looked like she was finally in her element. The implication was clear. If that was her element, then what had her time with Ethan been a cage? Olivia flinched as if she'd been struck. She looked at Ethan, at the ugly sneer on his face, and saw him through a new filter. She replayed his words in her head, not just from tonight, but from all the months they'd been together. She was holding me back. She was afraid of success. She was a starter wife. Had Alara been holding him back, or had he been the one suppressing her? The confidence Alara exuded on that yacht was not something a person simply acquired overnight by latching onto a billionaire. It was the confidence of someone who knew her own worth. Where had that woman been during their marriage? And why had Ethan felt the need to paint such a pathetic, demeaning portrait of her? The cracks in Ethan's perfect facade were no longer just visible. They were beginning to splinter. Olivia felt a cold dread creep into her heart. She was engaged to a man who was either a terrible judge of character or a deliberate, cruel liar. For the first time, she started to wonder if she was the real catch, or if she was just the next woman auditioning for a role in a fantasy of Ethan's own creation, a fantasy that was rapidly colliding with a stunning and undeniable reality. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced pleasantries, but for Olivia and for the rest of the friends at the table, something had irrevocably broken. The weekend in St. Bart's ended not with a bang, but with a strained and hasty dispersal at the airport. The camaraderie was gone, replaced by a polite distance. Back home, the sighting of Alara became a quiet obsession for the group, a puzzle they felt compelled to solve. The official story, as told by Ethan, had been so thoroughly debunked by that single radiant image that it created a vacuum, and they were desperate to fill it with the truth. It was Noah naturally who did the digging. As a journalist, he had access to research tools and a network of contacts that went beyond a simple Google search. He started with public records business filings and old university alumni newsletters. Liam, feeling a pang of guilt for his years of passive acceptance of Ethan's narrative, eagerly listened as Noah started to piece together the real story of Alara Walsh's life post-divorce. What they uncovered wasn't a story of a woman who got lucky, but one of astonishing resilience and reinvention. "You're not going to believe this," Noah said to Liam over the phone a week later. "That little admin job at the dental supply company, she quit that 2 weeks after the divorce was final." According to Noah's research, Alara had been utterly broken by the divorce. Ethan hadn't just left her, he had systematically dismantled her self-worth for years, convincing her that she was nothing without him. The divorce, where he had financially bled her dry, was the final devastating blow. For a few months, she drifted, staying with her sister, barely functioning. But then something shifted. It was a breakthrough born from hitting rock bottom. "Remember how she was always into art?" Noah asked. Ethan used to mock her for dragging him to those little indie galleries. Liam remembered. Ethan had called it Ilara's weird hobby. "Well," Noah continued, his voice filled with admiration, "she used the tiny bit of money she had left to enroll in a night course at the university. She went back to finish the degree she abandoned 20 years ago to put Ethan through his MBA program, a dual degree in art history and business administration." Alara hadn't just finished her degree, she had excelled. She graduated with honors, focusing her final thesis on a burgeoning and widely misunderstood market, investment-grade, digital, and multimedia art. While the traditional art world was still skeptical, Alara saw the future. She had a brilliant, intuitive eye for identifying emerging artists whose work had immense cultural and financial potential. After graduating, she started a small one-woman consultancy firm from her sister's spare bedroom. She called it Walsh Art Advisory. She wrote a blog that became a must-read for a niche group of tech-savvy art collectors. She was sharp, insightful, and her predictions on which artists were about to break out were uncannily accurate. The meeting with Sebastian Thorne was the pivotal moment, but it wasn't a chance encounter at a charity gala. Thorne, a known collector of unconventional assets, had been following her blog for months. He was deeply impressed by her intellect and her prescient analysis. He sought her out not as a potential date, but as a professional consultant. He invited her to be a keynote speaker at the exclusive Art and Algorithms Symposium he hosted annually in Geneva. That's where they met, Noah explained. She was on stage speaking to a room full of billionaires and tech moguls about the future of art curation. Thorne was in the front row. By all accounts, he was mesmerized, not by her looks, but by her brain. Their relationship began as a professional one. Thorne hired her firm to overhaul his private collection and advise on his personal art investments. He became her biggest client, and soon after her biggest champion. They discovered a shared passion not just for art, but for making it accessible. They believed technology could democratize the art world, and they began drafting a plan for a new kind of philanthropic entity. This led to the grand twist, the detail that made Ethan's gold digger theory so laughably, pathetically wrong. "She's not his girlfriend, Liam," Noah said, the revelation landing with the force of a bomb. "I mean, she is, but that's not the headline." About 6 months ago, they officially launched a joint venture. It's called the Thorne-Walsh Foundation. It's a massive multi-billion-dollar philanthropic and art investment fund. And get this, Sebastian Thorne is the chairman, but Alara Walsh is the chief executive officer, the CEO. The superyacht wasn't just a pleasure craft. It was a floating headquarters, a mobile gallery they were using to host international artists, museum curators, and investors as they sailed through the Caribbean, building partnerships for the Foundation's first global initiative. Alara Walsh hadn't just fallen into a billionaire's arms. She had built her own empire, brick by painful brick. She had taken the ashes of the life Ethan had torched and created something magnificent from them. She wasn't arm candy. She was a partner, a visionary, a CEO, a powerhouse who had found a man not to save her, but one whose power and vision were a match for her own. The woman on the yacht hadn't just been happy, she had been home. The truth about Alara, the CEO, the visionary, the co-founder of the Thorne-Walsh Foundation, spread through their social circle like a quiet, devastating seismic wave. It didn't just create cracks in Ethan's reputation, it triggered a full-scale demolition. Noah, feeling a certain grim satisfaction in revealing a truth so thoroughly concealed, made sure the key details reached not just Liam, but Chloe and the others from the St. Bart's trip. The information didn't just recontextualize Alara. It completely reframed their perception of Ethan. His years of condescending remarks, his dismissive hand waves, his pitying little anecdotes, they all now seemed like the desperate, pathetic actions of a man terrified by the potential of the woman he claimed to have outgrown. The most powerful aftershock, however, was building within the walls of Ethan's own home. Olivia had been a ghost since their return from the Caribbean, her usual adoration replaced by a cool, observational watchfulness that he found deeply unsettling. She was no longer his adoring audience. She was a detective, and he was her prime suspect. Late at night, after he was asleep, she would sit in the cold blue light of her tablet, tracing the digital breadcrumbs of Alara's past. She found the university's online archive and downloaded a copy of the thesis Alara had submitted, The Algorithmic Eye, Valuating and Curating Art in the Digital Age. As she read, a feeling of profound, sickening horror washed over her. The writing was brilliant, dense, prescient, and argued with a fierce intelligence. Alara had not only predicted the rise of blockchain-verified art 5 years before it became mainstream, but she had also built a compelling ethical framework for its curation. This was not the work of a mousy, unambitious woman. This was the work of a genius. Olivia's fingers trembled as she scrolled through page after page of incisive analysis, each sentence a fresh indictment of Ethan's lies. She felt a wave of nausea as she contrasted the powerful voice on the page with Ethan's sneering dismissal. She was sweet but simple. She had no drive. The final pieces of her disillusionment clicked into place. The confrontation, when it came, was not born of anger, but of a cold, hard certainty. She waited for him in the living room, the tablet resting on the coffee table between them like a piece of evidence. "I spoke to Chloe today," she began, her voice devoid of emotion. "She forwarded me an article about the Thorne Walsh Foundation." She tapped the screen, and Alara's smiling professional headshot appeared next to Sebastian Thorne's. "It turns out your starter wife, the one you felt so sorry for, is the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar philanthropic fund." Ethan, who had just poured himself a scotch, froze. He attempted his usual arsenal of deflection and charm. "Liv, honey, you can't be naive about this," he said, forcing a condescending chuckle. "It's a vanity title. A guy like Thorne does that for the woman he's with. He sets her up with a fancy title and a corner office to keep her happy. It's a gilded cage, nothing more. It's meaningless." "Is it?" Olivia countered, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "Because I read her thesis, Ethan. The one she wrote when she went back to school after you two divorced, the school she dropped out of 20 years ago to support you." She pushed the tablet across the table. "Read it. Tell me if the mind that produced that work is simple. Tell me if that woman is unambitious." He glanced at the title page and recoiled as if burned. He couldn't bring himself to read it. "This is ridiculous. You're letting this get to you. That life, that woman, it has nothing to do with us." "It has everything to do with us." Olivia's voice finally cracked with the weight of her fury and disappointment. "Our entire relationship, my entire understanding of you, is built on the story you told me about her, and it was all a lie. You didn't just lie to me, Ethan. You've been lying to yourself for years. You told me she was an anchor, that she was holding you back. But she wasn't, was she?" She stood up and began pacing, her movements sharp and agitated. "No, you were holding her back. You were so terrified that she might outshine you that you did everything in your power to convince her she couldn't. You clipped her wings, Ethan. You mocked her passions. You belittled her intelligence. You made her feel small so that you could feel big. That's not a marriage. That's psychological warfare. That's sabotage." His face, usually a mask of confident charm, began to crumble. "You don't understand," he stammered, his bravado failing him. "She had no confidence. I tried to help her. I tried to build her up." "No." Olivia spun on him, her eyes blazing. "You tried to keep her in a box you had built for her, and now you absolutely cannot stand that she found a way to break out of it and build a skyscraper of her own. You're not proud. You're not even angry. You're humiliated that the world can now see what you refuse to." His world was shrinking with terrifying speed. His calls to Liam now went straight to voicemail. Noah had simply unfollowed him on all social media. He was an island, and the tide was coming in. Desperate to regain control, to rewrite the ending of this disastrous chapter, he made a fatal error in judgment. He saw online that the Thorne Walsh Foundation was hosting the opening of a new exhibition. Alara would be there. He would go. He would bump into her, be magnanimous and charming, the bigger person. He would show everyone, and most importantly himself, that he was unbothered, that her success was a quaint footnote he found amusing. It was a desperate last-ditch gamble by a man about to lose everything. The gallery was a different world, one of quiet power, old money, and new art. Ethan, in his slightly too shiny suit, felt a sheen of sweat on his brow. He felt like an intruder. He spotted her easily. She wasn't just in the room. She owned it. She was speaking with a white-haired museum director and a famous avant-garde artist, her gestures economical and confident, her laugh warm but authoritative. She radiated an energy that was both inspiring and intimidating. He hovered at the edge of the circle, waiting for his moment, a predator, stalking a creature that was no longer his prey. When the group dispersed, he moved in, plastering his most charming smile on his face. "Ella," he said, the old pet name, sounding alien and foolish in this sophisticated space. She turned. There was no shock, no anger, not even surprise in her eyes. There was only a faint, weary recognition, the look one gives an old, unpleasant memory that has briefly surfaced. "Ethan," she replied, her tone perfectly chillingly level. "Look at you," he said, gesturing vaguely at the priceless art on the walls. "This is quite something. I have to say, I'm so proud of what you've fallen into." It was the grenade he had chosen to roll at her feet, his last pathetic attempt to frame her success as dumb luck. Alara's polite expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened into chips of obsidian. She took a single deliberate step closer, invading his personal space and lowering her voice into a devastatingly calm indictment meant only for him. Fallen into, she repeated the words, precise and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "No, Ethan. I climbed. I climbed on my hands and knees out of the deep, dark hole you left me in. The hole you spent 10 years digging for me with your casual cruelty, your patronizing pats on the head, your condescension and your tiny, fragile ego that couldn't bear the thought of a woman who might be your equal." Ethan's smile evaporated. His face went numb. "You never saw me," she continued, her voice unwavering. "Because you never actually looked. You were too busy looking at your own reflection in my eyes, and you demanded that reflection be small and admiring at all times. You told our friends I was afraid of success. The truth is, you were terrified of mine." She paused, letting the words sink into his marrow. He stood there speechless, stripped bare under the unforgiving gallery lights. He was no longer Ethan Vanderbilt, the successful VP. He was just Alara Walsh's insecure ex-husband. "The greatest gift you ever gave me was signing those divorce papers," she concluded, her professional poise returning in an instant. "You didn't set me free. You unshackled me from the dead weight of your insecurity." She gave him a final dismissive glance. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have board members to speak to. I have work to do." Without a second glance, she turned her back on him and walked away, rejoining a circle of influential people who greeted her with warmth and respect. Ethan was left standing alone in the middle of a crowded room, a void in the sea of mingling guests. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him even if there were none. He was a statue of his own failure, a monument to a collapsed empire of lies. Ethan walked out of the gallery and into the cool night air, but he couldn't seem to get a full breath. The city's vibrant symphony, the blare of horns, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren sounded muffled and far away, as if he were underwater. He stumbled through the streets in a daze. Ilara's words echoing in his mind, each one a perfectly aimed stone, shattering the stained glass windows of his self-perception. I climbed. Your tiny, fragile ego. You were too busy looking at your own reflection. He got into his car, a luxury sedan that suddenly felt like a cheap rental, and drove aimlessly. The glittering skyline of the city he had claimed to conquer now seemed to mock him, each light a reminder of a world he was no longer a part of. By the time he arrived back at the apartment, the sun was beginning to threaten the horizon, and he felt a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. The true consequences of his public unraveling began the next day. He saw a missed call and a text from Liam. "We need to talk. Call me." Steeling himself, Ethan made the call, hoping he could smooth things over, deploy the charm that had always been his salvation. "Hey man, about last night," Ethan started, but Liam cut him off. "I wasn't there, Ethan, but Chloe was," Liam said, his voice flat and heavy, stripped of its usual warmth. "She told me everything. Not just the confrontation, but the look on your face, the things you said." He paused, and Ethan could hear him take a deep, weary breath. "I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About all the years I just nodded along. I remember Ilara, Ethan. I remember her quizzing you for your MBA exams at our old poker nights, making flashcards for you. You used to call her your rock. Then somewhere along the line, she became an anchor in your stories. I never questioned it, and that's on me, but I'm questioning it now. Liam, it was complicated. You don't know the whole story. I know the story you told." Liam interrupted, his voice gaining a hard edge of conviction. "And it turns out that story was fiction, a fiction you needed to tell to make yourself the hero. I can't be friends with that man anymore, Ethan. I don't respect him." The line went dead, and with that click, a friendship of 2 decades was erased. Later, he saw a post from Noah on social media, a link to an article about narcissistic personalities with a simple cutting caption, "Some people build castles in the sky. Others build them on foundations of lies. Both are destined to collapse." It wasn't addressed to him, but it was aimed directly at his heart. The final, most devastating blow was waiting for him at home. He walked in to find 2 suitcases standing by the door like sentinels. Olivia was in the bedroom, not crying, but methodically emptying her drawers into a box. Her movements were calm, precise, and utterly final. "Liv, don't do this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. I know I messed up. I was wrong. Okay, I'll admit it. I'll do anything." She stopped and turned to face him, her eyes filled not with hatred, but with a profound and unshakable sadness. "There's nothing to fix, Ethan. You can't fix a foundation that was never there. Our entire relationship, this whole life we were planning, it was a fantasy. It was your revenge story." "No, that's not true. I love you," he insisted, taking a step towards her. "Do you?" she asked, her voice genuinely curious. "Or do you love that I'm not her? Do you love that my family has a respectable name? That I didn't challenge your ego? That I was happy to play the supporting role of the real catch?" "The engagement ring on my finger," she said, twisting it off and placing it gently on the dresser. "It never felt like a promise to me. It felt like a trophy you'd won. for successfully escaping your past. He flinched as if struck. Olivia, that's cruel. No, Ethan, she said, her voice soft but firm. Cruel is what you did to her, and what I'm doing now is saving myself from being your next victim. She looked him directly in the eye. Let's play this forward. What happens in 5 years when I decide I want to go back to law school or start my own company? What happens when I have an opinion that differs from yours or a success that has nothing to do with you? Does my ambition suddenly become a problem? Do I become your new anchor? Do you start telling your friends that I've changed and that I'm difficult? I won't let you write my story, Ethan. And I certainly won't let you edit me down to a footnote in yours. She picked up the box and walked past him toward the door. He made one last, desperate attempt. So that's it. You're just throwing it all away because of her? Olivia paused at the door and turned a look of final, sorrowful clarity on her face. That's where you're still wrong. This has nothing to do with her. This is about you. The tragedy is that you had a real catch once. A true partner, a brilliant mind, a woman who by all accounts loved you unconditionally, and you were too blind, too insecure, and too small to see it. You didn't outgrow her, Ethan. You were never big enough for her in the first place. She walked out of the apartment and closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing in the vast, silent space. He was finally truly alone in his kingdom, but the walls were gone, and the throne was ashes. The weeks that followed were a long, slow descent into a grey, featureless existence. The vibrant, impeccably designed apartment became his prison. The silence was deafening. He lost his edge at work. His charisma, which had been fueled by a superiority complex he no longer possessed, sputtered and died. He made sloppy mistakes, his confidence shattered. One evening, staring blankly at his tablet, he saw a new article. It was a feature in a global business journal about the Thorne Walsh Foundation's groundbreaking new platform. The main photo was a candid shot of Alara on a video call with her global team. She was laughing, pointing to a complex chart on a screen, clearly in command, respected and admired by the faces looking back at her. The final scene of the article described her on the deck of the yacht as the sun set. Sebastian Thorne brought her not champagne, but a thick binder of documents and a mug of tea. The Zurich team is in, he'd said, his voice a low murmur of pride. They're following your lead completely. You were right about the market timing. He squeezed her shoulder, a gesture of profound equal partnership. Ethan stared at the image, at the woman he had tried so hard to erase, now more vivid and powerful than he could have ever imagined. The starter wife, the anchor. She was navigating the world while he was adrift in an empty apartment. She had found a partner who saw her brilliance as an asset, not a threat. She had climbed out of the hole he had dug, and from the summit, she wasn't looking back. She was looking at the new dawn, and her entire world was bathed in light. And there you have it. A story about how the truth, like a powerful current, can rise up and wash away even the most carefully built empire of lies. Ethan thought he was trading up, but he was really just trading away his own chance at genuine connection, blinded by his own insecurity. Ilara's story is a powerful reminder that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Sometimes, the worst endings are actually the most liberating beginnings. What did you think of Ethan's downfall? Were you cheering for Ilara? Let us know in the comments below.